evening. I trust I find you well. This is the third webinar of the Digital Intelligence. Digital Intelligence and Data-Driven Decision Making module. Today we are looking at chapter number 4 in the book. We're getting closer and closer to the practical aspects of this module. So we just have some theory to get out of the way in this webinar and the next webinar, and then after that we start getting our hands dirty with Python. I encourage you to start downloading the program, start playing with the program, so that when we start working with it, it will not be the first time that you are seeing that program. So, as I mentioned, today we're looking at chapter number 4, which is cybersecurity and data analytics. We are in a global world that has massive flows of data, and the majority of those flows occur over the internet. So it becomes imperative on an organization, one, to incorporate data analytics to be able to fully exploit whatever value can be accessed off those flows of data, right? It also becomes imperative on the organization to try to secure those data, because it is not just you within the organization that sees a value in those data, but also other people outside the organization. And given that you are connected to the internet, it makes you vulnerable with these cyber attacks. So cybersecurity becomes really important. Now, let's talk about how we have gradually, because the internet has always been there. Not always been there, but has been there for a good long while. But there's been significant changes in cybersecurity. So now let's talk about what the traditional measures of securing uh, not just your organization, but the information within your organization are, and why those traditional methods are no longer viable. So, traditional secure perimeter methods are beginning to disappear. It is no longer enough for you to physically secure your assets and be content with just doing that, right? If anything, it becomes less and less important in this era. And there are a number of reasons why it's becoming less and less important for you to put physical security measures around the organization for you to feel content. Right? The first one is cloud computing. The majority of our data that the organization has, the majority of the software that the organization has, is held on cloud computing platforms, right? And the majority of these cloud computing platforms are external to your organization. The majority of them are not even hosted in the same country that your organization is located. Right, so cloud computing essentially has taken out those valuable assets and located them significantly away from your organization. And for you to be able to access your data, it requires for you to actually work through the internet. It requires you to now be mindful of how those data are flowing from where they are stored to where you are using them. The other thing that is making perimeter security less relevant is the advent of mobile technology, right? Nowadays, there was a time when your computer was only located on your table, right? That was why it was called a desktop. It was a computing device that sat on top of the desk and never moved, right? It would be quite a mission for you to say, I want to work from home. I will take my computer. It would be quite a mission to carry that CRT screen to your car, the tower to your car and the keyboard and the power supply to your car, right? Nowadays, it's not that hard for people to move with their devices from the offices to their homes, right? So you securing a area where the offices are does not completely secure the devices along with the data and programs that are within those devices. The third one is one that we all, what most of us experienced, say in 2020 when the COVID hard lockdown hit, where the only people who were able to work, apart from emergency workers, were people who were working remotely, right? Ever since then, remote working has been normalized in most organizations, meaning that people are able to work from their homes for part or for all of the time that they are working for the organization, right? The problem with remote work is different workers stay in different places, and it is not practical for you to go and physically secure the devices in people's private residences. So that perimeter security that you had around your offices won't do much for that. Likewise, as people are working remotely, they will consistently work over the internet to access their data. They will continuously work on the internet for them to be able to collaborate with their colleagues. Right, so with you working over the internet, data is now flowing freely over several thousands of computers as you are passing messages back and forth, as you're passing data back and forth. And this now raises the threats, and these threats are no are both outside the organization. As we said, the data flows are over the internet, and anyone who has access to your internet uh, has the potential to present a threat, especially people with interest and skills to try to intercept those data and those programs. We also have threats that also exist within the organizations. As we have normalized the movement of data, we also, sorry, the movement of devices, we also start experiencing new types of threats that are linked to people within the organization, either lifting one important device or even to do with how employees conduct themselves on these devices given the myriad of threats that the organization faces. Cybersecurity has thus evolved from guarding network borders. So it's no longer just about guarding your local area network using things like firewalls to prevent external people from being able to access your network, to being about continuously monitoring all the activity, right? To being about detecting, actively detecting threats. It's no longer about being reactive. You need to be active in detecting your threats. And likewise, as soon as you detect your threats, you need to be able to respond rapidly, respond quickly so that you mitigate the amount of losses that the organization experiences. So most organizations are now moving from a prevention only to a prevent, detect, and respond model. We'll say more about this in the slides that follow. So, as we mentioned earlier, cybersecurity is now growing rapidly. Why? Because we need to protect sensitive data, and this sensitive data needs to be urgently protected, right? Not just from the point of view of this is something valuable you want to keep to yourself, but also there are laws. Also, there's a reputation of the organization. There are many things to consider when you are holding data that is sensitive. A lot of the modern attacks that organizations are facing have become a whole lot more sophisticated. These attacks are now targeting systems, they target applications, and they target information that is presented by the organization. Not only are we getting a higher level of sophistication when it comes to attacks, but we have an increased level of vulnerabilities because of changes in the way that we do things. We now have a lot of IoT devices, this is the Internet of Things devices that are on our networks, right? So all the sensors, all the smart machines, or that are within the organization present a point of failure. We also have bring your own device policies. Organizations are no longer purchasing machines whereby they own them and they are in charge of the software that is on the device, but people come in with their own device and they are able to connect to a network and do their regular work off their private devices. This essentially increases the number of entry points into a corporate network, right? The other vulnerability that is there is we now have a lot of third-party vendors of software, as well as supply chain, as well as people that are along our supply chain, and all of these add to the external risks that the organization faces. Then that whole aspect of internal risks that we have human error. Human error and internal negligence can also become one of the weakest links that the organization has. Right? Uh, so it's become really important that our security or cyber security changes. That it's no longer enough for your cyber security to be reactive. It now is imperative that you become proactive, right? Likewise, before your cybersecurity was focused on specific threats, now because of the level of sophistication and the speed of the changes within this environment, it is also not enough for organizations to focus on specific threats. There is also poor, traditional methods are also poor at integrating data across the system. Usually they just focus on that one area of the business, whereas the people trying to attack your systems are attacking it from a number of different points. And it helps having a wider uh, perspective so that you can actually view the whole organization and the threats that they are facing. You may spot patterns that may only become visible when you see the different anomalies that are occurring in the different systems that you have within your organization. Traditional systems also tend to be quite slow at responding to new attacks. So usually you will need to first update your system before your system is able to recognize an attack. And that is no longer acceptable, right? Because a lot of our mission critical systems are vulnerable to cyber attack, and it becomes impossible for you to work in this modern landscape with a system that can only be reactive. So now this brings us to cybersecurity analytics, right? What are cybersecurity analytics? How do they help us in this new environment that we're seeing ourselves? Well, let's start off by talking about what cybersecurity is about. Cybersecurity is really about protecting your systems, your networks, and your digital assets from threats. And usually these threats will come from the internet or from a network related intrusion. Our traditional methods alone are no longer enough for the modern complex attacks that our organization are facing. So, what can we do? Well, we can now make use of data analytics. And by data analytics, we making use of our statistical tools, making use of our AI and our machine learning tools to be able to detect and prevent the various threats that our organizations face. Right? When we talk about analytics, the first things that most people think about is what is our source of our data that we're going to analyze for us to be able to be proactive in our systems, right? Well, there's a variety of data sources that you can think about. Think about the network traffic, right? That provides a wealth of data into potential threats, into anomalies that may be on the system. Logs of who's using the system, how are they using the system, when are they using the systems. Logs become really important, right? System behavior. How is the system behaving, right? Once the system is suddenly under strain, in conditions where we do not expect strain, that can indicate that there is something that is untoward that is occurring. Another thing is user activity. How are the users on the network behaving? If there is some activity that is not normal, that may indicate that something is amiss and may need a second look. Right? From these data sources, various data sources, you're going to collect your data and you're going to analyze your data so that you're able to convert that raw data or those raw data into actionable intelligence. Right? And given that you have all these various points of generating and storing data, right? It gives you a wealth of data because we are in the big data era. And this also gives you an opportunity to be able to do your cyber analytics in real time. And by doing them in real time, you are now able to continuously monitor your system. You are now able to detect any anomalies and intrusions as they are taking place, which therefore allows you to be able to respond quicker to these threats and by responding quicker to these threats, you're able to reduce the time that would have been wasted in identifying and resolving any incidences that may be taking place. Okay, so now we have an idea, a great idea of what cybersecurity is about, right? Why is there a need for cybersecurity? Now, let me just give you an example of a practice question that may come up either in an assignment or in an either in an assignment or in an examination. You will likely be given a case study, right? A case study will present you with a real world scenario. And from that case study, you will be asked a series of questions whereby you are required to use information from the case study along with the information that you have learned from the theory that you have learned to try to get a comprehensive answer to the question that is presented. Here's an example of it, right? Consider you've been given a case study about an electric car company, say for instance BYD, and then after being given information that may be related about how the company runs, potentially how the company makes use of various technologies, you're then asked to critically assess 5 ways in which cyber criminals could infiltrate an electric car. Right? Do note, because you've been given a case study, you need to note what is the context that I have been given that requires me to actually answer this particular question. Then with the knowledge of the context, now you need to think about your theory and see how that theory would apply to that particular context that has been presented to you. Because there are things that are specific to that context that make the way you approach the question tailored to that particular context. So if we're talking about electric cars, you need to think, how do electric cars work? Electric cars have software that is used to monitor how the car is operating. The software is usually updated regularly, right? Within those updates, there is a vulnerability. These electric cars are usually going to be connecting to car chargers. And these chargers are usually created by people outside the organization, maintained by people outside the organization, and they are kept in public spaces. These connections often have also a digital interface that allows your car to be able to communicate with the charger so that it can be able to sense what information about the charge with electricity that is going to be coming into the system to also detect information related to anything anomaly so that you can stop it and so on. But likewise, because of this interface, it also creates an opportunity for people to be able to penetrate the systems of the car, right? So these are the types of things you need to think about. These are the types of things you need to consider when answering the questions. Given my theory, what is it about this given scenario that requires me to apply my theory in a specific way that allows me to be able to get the most marks? Right? So being able to tailor your answer to the specific scenario or to the specific context that has been presented to you becomes really important. Okay, so now let's talk about the different types of threats that are out there, right? 'Cause this question is just talking about 5 ways in which cyber criminals could infiltrate an electric car. Well, let's talk about the different ways cyber criminals are actually targeting different information systems or different systems so that they are able to exploit them. Right. I'm going to go really quick through a number of them, then I'll have a couple of videos that are going to summarize the different threats that are there or the different factors that are giving rise to cyber attack. The first one is the advent and the spread of IoT devices. IoT stands for the Internet of Things, right? These are usually smart devices that allow us to be able to connect our various devices. It could be something as simple as printers, scanners within the organization. It could be things like thermostats within the organization. It could be alarm systems within the organization. And more, we're seeing different devices also now being connected, being able to connect onto our systems. So things as simple as light switches, things as simple as air conditioning, things as simple as fridges, microwaves are now being able to connect to our different networks, and they are also now becoming these Internet of Thing devices. So there's a rapid growth of smart connected devices, right? And most of these devices are already pre-set up and they usually come with default passwords or very weak encryption because different manufacturers invest at different levels in the level of security that their devices will have. And usually their software is really updated or patched, so any vulnerabilities are usually very well known out there, and usually they present very easy points of access. This means that they can be hijacked and used to be able to enter your corporate networks or even to enter your specific system that you may have. Right? So you can even think in the other example we're talking about electric cars. Electric cars need to be able to sense the battery. You need to be able to sense the level of motion, the temperature. All of those are IoT devices. Most of those IoT devices are going to be linked via wired and wireless network connections, and that presents a problem. The other thing that we can think about are software defects. Here we're talking about bugs in applications, in operating systems, and in drivers. And these create hidden entry points for attackers. Right? Usually, as soon as a bug has been identified, often enough, they are publicized by the software company so that people are able to become aware and they can start to put the update or the patch that is required. But in the same vein, we know that people don't accommodate or don't incorporate best practices with respect to updating their software. So a lot of software can tend to be updated and it leads it to have a lot of these vulnerabilities. And that allows people to be able to access your system via these software bugs. Issues can include missing input validation, weak access controls. These are all examples of issues that are likely to be there that can allow people to easily access your computers. Example that we have in the text that you can read up on is the heartbeat bug that was used to expose the open SSL system for you to be able to remotely access your systems, and that has enabled data theft. Other thing that we have are race conditions. And under race conditions, this is when you have timing flaws that occur when your system is trying to do a number of operations simultaneously. Usually, attackers exploit any delays that may occur within your system as one task has been completed and they are now waiting for the other task to also be completed or to also start. There is usually a delay between the two, and those present opportunities for people to be able to exploit. Right? This allows for privilege escalation so that people who may have very limited privileges are able to escalate their privileges to be able to do a whole lot more on the system, which can potentially allow them to have greater access and to greater harm to the data or to the applications on the system. Right? Another word, name for these particular vulnerability is time of check to time of use. Another vulnerability that is there is buffer overflow. And this is when programs write beyond their allocated memory. And this often leads to crashes or even opportunities for remote code to be executed on your system. An example that we had was a code red worm that occurred in the early 2000s that exploited buffer overflow in the Microsoft server systems. All right, it was something that led to a lot of websites crashing simultaneously, and it was like one of those domino effects that one system that was compromised led to another system that was linked to that also being compromised and so on and so on. So it really was quite a headache, and Microsoft had to develop a patch to try to overcome that. Right. Another type Another factor that is given rise to cyber attacks is SQL injection, and this is when malicious SQL commands are inserted via unsafe input fields. So through those input fields, such as your login fields, people are able to insert code that your computer may mistake for code that must be run, and it can have a lot of unintended effects from the organization's point of view. Often enough, it can reveal, modify, or delete data records on your system. The final one and the most common is malware. Malware is software that is used to infiltrate or damage systems. There's been a lot of there's been a lot of there've been a lot of various malware that has developed over the years, and each type of malware is getting more and more sophisticated, which is leading to greater harm for organizations. Malware can move from worms, which are self-replicating programs that replicate across networks. Viruses, which are usually attached to files or programs. Trojans, which are uh, programs that may look like legitimate programs that you need when they're actually doing harm to your system. Ransomware, which is software that comes to encrypt your data and locks you out, means you're not able to access your systems or access your data. Or spyware or adware, which is used to monitor how you are operating within on your system without your knowledge. Sometimes you have adware, which is just irritating ads just popping up left, right, and center, which almost makes your system extremely slow or really hard to use. Now I'm going to play a video. The video is going to just summarize all these different types of attacks that we have. And first one is going to talk about the first group of attacks, and the second video will just talk about malware because of all the various components that come with malware. Yeah, those videos were quite informative, really helpful in trying to identify all the different types of threats that the organization faces. It actually summarizes the drill well, puts it in a way that we're able to visualize and understand. Now, we've talked about the threats that are there. We've talked about traditional ways of securing our systems no longer work. Perimeter security is not sufficient. Traditional modes of securing our systems, like our traditional antivirus systems, usually were reactive. They were based on the idea of, even when there was continuous monitoring, they were based on the idea of knowing the types of threats that are there rather than identifying new threats and responding to them as these threats come online. Now, for us to be working with cyber analytics so that we can now start to even identify new threats and respond to them in real time, we need to be able to analyze a lot of historic data, right? And by historic data, I'm not saying data from just many years ago, even data from yesterday, the day before yesterday, and so on. We need to analyze that historic data so that we're able to build a baselines for our program so that our program knows what our normal behavior is, right? Knows what is normal system performance, knows what is normal user activity, right? So after you build these baselines, you now have a basis for monitoring user behavior such that you can identify anything that falls outside the normal parameters, and you can automate any alerts for anything that requires an additional look or anything that you say is a threat. You are able to ring fence that so that you are able to mitigate its effects. Yeah, also able to deploy intruder detection systems across your networks as well as on your platforms. You're able to also slow down the effect of any intrusions that you have. Right? Once, as soon as you detect them, you're able to slow them down so that you're able to mitigate the negative effects of those intrusions. At the end of the day, this allows us to be able to have intelligent risk dashboards that allows us to identify and prioritize any thing that seems out of place, so that we either further monitor it or we ring fence it so that we can try to understand what went wrong so that we can respond to it quicker or even prevent it from being able to get as far as it went. Our systems essentially from the protect, detect, respond model. Under protect, we have policies and our data governance policies that are set up to protect the data and the programs on our systems. We have access control measures that are out there that try to limit who can access our systems. We're training our employees so that people implement best practices with respect to cyber hygiene. When it comes to detection, we have our intruder detection systems that are continuously monitoring our systems. We are also monitoring any anomalies that are on the system. We're making use of machine learning analytics to continuously update what our normal behavior or our normal user behavior is likely to be. All right. So our systems are just continually updating so that you are always on top of any threats that are out there. At the end of the day, as soon as you've detected these threats, you must be able to respond, right? And you need to respond timelessly. So you have incident response plans and recovery actions. Here's a diagram that tries to put this into perspective in a very clear way, right? This is figure 4.1 in your study guide. Under predict, we are constantly trying to under the predict, we're constantly trying to assess risk or trying to anticipate what are the new ways that people can try to attack us, right? We're trying to also establish any baseline for our system performance or our user behavior so that we're able to set up ways that we can identify anything that's out of place. Under the prevent, we are now constantly trying to elevate any security response for anything that has been identified as being outside baseline behavior for either the system or the user behavior. We try to isolate any incidences within the system so that we mitigate the risk. We ring fence the risk to a particular area of the system. And this, in essence, allows us to be able to either completely avoid an attack or to be able to lower the effect of that attack on our systems. We need to be able to detect any successful attacks on our system. So we need to be able to identify any incidences that are already occurring on our systems, and we do that by constantly analyzing, monitoring our systems, and prioritizing anything that we consider as risky, as a risk to our system, right? And this allows us to be able to respond really quickly to any threats so that we're able to contain them, right? Then the final one, we must be able to respond. We must be able to take corrective action so that as soon as we identify that there is an intrusion, it has had an effect, we can contain, not just contain, but undo some of those effects on our system. So it becomes important for us to design or model, any policy change that we have so that we're able to adapt quickly. If there are any incidences, we must be able to investigate these incidences to identify what was the root cause and how can we better respond to these types of incidences in the future, right? Then the last one, historic incidents analysis allows us to be able to anticipate something similar or even be able to predict something that is different but that is consistent with the changes in the different threats that we're facing as time goes by. From the diagram, you can see that this is a continuous process that the organization needs to do. An organization needs to be able to set up policies, right? Implement security protocols that allow them to be able to best detect these threats that are there. All right. As you implement these protocols are incorporated into your system so that you're able to continuously manage any risks that the organization has, right? After implementing these protocols, on the basis of these protocols, you start to monitor any incidences or any potential incidences that are there so that you make sure that you are always complying with your protocols. Whenever there's any breach, whenever there's any issue, it is important to communicate that to the security personnel or the people responsible for the security of the organization. It is important to document that so that you can always incorporate it into your historic incident analysis so that you're able to better handle such incidences. And the moment you realize that your protocols were not sufficient to meet a particular threat, well, you can now start to adjust those you can start to adjust the security status. Now your security is no longer sufficient. You need to adjust your security status, and ultimately you need to adjust your policies so that your organizations are in a better place, right? So this diagram does a nice summary of all the threats and all the policies respond to these threats so that organizations can try to be more proactive and less reactive to the different threats that they may face. Okay, great. I hope everything was clear, and we will meet in the coming week for us to discuss the next chapter, which will be chapter number 4. Do have a good evening.